I didn't think it would rain that day. But somehow, the universe knew better than I did. Knew that grief always felt heavier when your shoes sank into the mud. When the sky pressed down on your back like an apology it was too late to give. The end. Cemetery smelled of wet earth and old stones, the kind that cracked and split when the frost came in winter. I stood there, alone, clutching the thin, slippery strap of my mother's old leather purse against my side, like it could somehow anchor me. The casket was simple. Weathered wood, no ornate brass handles, no velvet lining. That was how she had wanted it. "No waste, Belle," she had said once, brushing my hair back when I was 12. "Flowers and fancy coffins are for the living, not the dead." I swallowed hard, wishing I could forget every time I had rolled. My eyes at her practicality. The priest droned on, his voice mechanical, reading from a sheet he barely glanced at. Not once did he say anything personal. Nothing about the way my mother loved bitter black coffee, or how she sang Patsy Cline off-key while mending the same kitchen curtain for the 3rd time. Nothing about how her laugh filled the cracks of our broken house like sunlight. Behind me, the family gathered like a flock of uneasy crows, their black umbrellas bobbing in the drizzle. I heard the whispers, sharp, ugly things, drifting toward me with the mist. Shame she ended up like that. She was always stubborn. No one's fault but her own. And then I heard it, loud enough to shatter what little composure I had managed to wrap around myself like a threadbare coat. She deserved to die alone. My uncle's voice, Robert, slicing through the rain like a cruel knife. For a moment, I didn't breathe. The words hit me square in the chest, lodging there like broken glass. I turned toward him, my vision blurring not from the rain, but from the sudden, violent need to scream. How dare he? How dare he stand here, less than 6 feet from her grave, and throw stones with the same mouth that had once begged her for help when he gambled away his savings? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Only a shallow, shaking breath. The world narrowed, the edges of the cemetery blurring, until there was only the casket, the rain, and the gaping wound his words had left behind. I think I might have bolted, run from the whole mess of it, if it hadn't been for the stranger. A tall man in a dark military uniform stepped forward from the fringe of the gathering. I hadn't noticed him before. He seemed almost part of the mist, silent and still. Raindrops slid off the brim of his cap, soaking into the worn fabric of his jacket, glinting off the rows of medals pinned neatly to his chest. His boots left deep prints in the mud as he moved forward with a calm, deliberate certainty. He stopped beside the casket, his gloved hand resting lightly on the edge of the wood, head bowed. And then he said it. 7 words. "She saved more lives than you know." That was all. But it was enough to freeze the funeral mid-breath. Even the whispers stopped, suspended in the heavy, wet air. Uncle Robert's face, so smug a moment ago, drained of color. He took a small, involuntary step backward, like the words had struck him physically. I gripped the strap of my mother's purse tighter, feeling the worn leather bite into my palm. The soldier looked at me then. Not a long look, not invasive, but steady, grounded, respectful. And in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen from anyone else since my mother died. Honor, recognition, a quiet kind of grief. Before I could find words, before I could even move, he straightened, gave a crisp, respectful nod toward me, and turned away, disappearing into the curtain of rain without another word. I stood there, shivering, rain sliding down my cheeks like tears I couldn't cry. The funeral ended in an awkward, shuffling kind of silence. No one dared say anything after that. They scattered, umbrellas bobbing away like dark birds, eager to escape the weight hanging in the air. I stayed until the groundskeeper lowered the casket into the raw, open earth, the mechanical whine of the lift sounding like a bone breaking in the misty quiet. Only when the first shovelful of dirt hit the lid did I let the tears fall freely. I pressed my forehead against the cold metal of the necklace I wore, a small silver locket my mother had given me when I graduated high school. Inside, a picture of the two of us laughing over burnt pancakes. She deserved better than this, I whispered into the rain. Somewhere inside, something shifted, broke, and maybe, just maybe, started to heal. I didn't know who that soldier was. I didn't know what secrets my mother had carried quietly to her grave. But I was going to find out. And when I did, I promised her silently I would make sure the truth was louder than the lies. It's strange how the mind edits memories, softens some, sharpens others like broken glass. When I think of my childhood, it isn't the poverty that rises first, it's the warmth. A tiny, sagging house with chipped paint, and a stubborn garden of marigolds that bloomed no matter how many times winter tried to kill them. Hand-me-down curtains that smelled faintly of lemon polish. The low hum of the radio. On Sunday mornings, mixing gospel hymns with the sound of my mother humming as she kneaded dough with strong, flour-dusted hands. Marie Davenport wasn't perfect. She was strict sometimes to the point of harshness. The kind of woman who believed in consequences and curfews, in standing tall even when the world tried to bend you. But she loved me with a fierceness that burned through every secondhand Christmas, every mended backpack strap, every whispered goodnight through the thin walls of our home. It wasn't enough for the world, though. The whispers started when I was young, soft at first, almost a background noise. Marie's always been difficult. Too. Proud for her own good. Would have been better if she'd just married properly. I didn't understand them then. I only knew that family gatherings grew colder, shorter. That my uncles, my aunts, even the cousins who used to braid my hair, began to look through me like I was made of glass. By the time I was 16, it was clear. In their eyes, my mother had failed some unwritten test of womanhood. And somehow, that stain spread to me. I carried that shame like a second skin, even when I told myself I didn't care. When Daniel came into my life, it felt like sunlight breaking through a decade of gray. He was everything I thought I needed. Charming, polished, the golden son of a family who drove new cars and used cloth napkins without irony. He made me feel seen, wanted, like I could finally step into a different story. I still remember the first night I brought him home, the way Marie wiped her hands nervously on her jeans, trying to tame her calloused fingers, the way her eyes, sharp and too perceptive, studied him with a caution I didn't understand. A caution that prickled at the back of my neck, even as I laughed too loudly at Daniel's jokes. When he left, that night, she sat beside me at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug like she was trying to warm herself with it. "Charm hides rust, Belle," she said quietly, staring into the steam. I rolled my eyes, told her she was paranoid, bitter, told myself she was just jealous. I might have a life bigger than the one we'd stitched together out of scraps. Looking back now, I wonder if a part of me already knew she was right. It started small after we married. Daniel didn't forbid me from visiting her. Nothing so crude. He just made it inconvenient. Planned things at the last minute. Forgot to fill the gas tank. Complained about how draining it was to listen to her negativity. "You know she thinks you're still that little poor girl," he'd say, half joking, tugging me into his lap. "You don't owe her your life, Belle. You're better than that." And I wanted so badly to believe him. So the visits stretched longer apart. Phone calls shortened from hours to minutes. Holidays became excuses, a ski trip, a work dinner, anything but sitting in that tiny, too quiet house staring at the person who knew me better than anyone, and who could see what I was slowly becoming. Marie never pushed. She never begged. She just stopped asking. By the time I realized the silence between us had thickened into something permanent, it was already too late. I got the call from the hospital. 3 weeks after Christmas, a voicemail so casual it sounded almost wrong. Your mother, Marie Davenport, has been admitted. If you could contact us regarding her care. I hadn't seen her in almost a year. The guilt twisted through me, vicious and unforgiving, as I sat in the parking lot gripping the steering wheel, the phone still buzzing weakly in my lap. I told Daniel. He nodded, distracted, scrolling through his phone. She'll be fine. They always make it sound worse than it is. You don't have to drop everything. I nodded back, grateful for the out. Promised myself I'd visit after the weekend. Maybe send flowers first. Something tasteful. Something that said, I'm busy but I care. I never got the chance. Marie died 2 days later. Pneumonia. Complicated. By undiagnosed diabetes, the nurse said gently over the phone. She asked for you, the nurse added, softly, almost apologetically. I remember sitting on the floor of our pristine kitchen, the cold tile biting into my legs, staring at the untouched fruit bowl on the counter, 3 glossy green apples. 3. It felt like the universe was mocking me with the neatness of it all. Daniel wrapped an arm around me, murmuring something about not letting grief swallow me. But it already had. I just hadn't noticed until the silence became unbearable. It started with a flicker, a small, stupid flicker. I was sitting at the kitchen island, the one Daniel insisted we needed because all proper houses have islands, sipping cold coffee and pretending to look at vacation rentals online. The screen glitched once, twice, then blacked out entirely. I jiggled the cord, annoyed. When that didn't work, I moved to Daniel's office to use his laptop, a place I rarely entered without asking first. Privacy keeps the magic alive, Belle, he used to say with a wink, ruffling my hair like I was a clever child who needed indulging. His computer was open, humming softly. I don't know what made me look. Curiosity, maybe. Loneliness, more likely. The kind of loneliness that seeps into your bones when you realize the person lying next to you every night hasn't actually seen you in years. The email tab was still logged in. Messages lined up like neat little bullets, most labeled business or urgent, but one thread stood out. It was titled, Princess Disaster. My stomach twisted before I even clicked. The messages were worse than I could have imagined. There she was, a woman I didn't know, laughing in typed words about my pathetic loyalty, mocking my desperation to be enough, joking about how easily Daniel spun me in circles while building a real life with her. Attached were photos, hotel rooms, wine glasses clinking, him, my husband, smiling the way he hadn't smiled at me in years. I sat there, cold spreading from the center of my chest outward, like frost cracking across a pond. For a moment, all I could hear was the soft tick, tick, tick of the grandfather clock Daniel had bought at an estate sale, proudly declaring it a symbol of our legacy. Legacy. What legacy? A hollow marriage filled with expensive furniture and a woman who had shrunk herself small enough to fit inside. His carefully constructed world, I dug deeper, numb, robotic bank statements, hidden withdrawals, legal documents with my forged signature, funneling my inheritance, the money Marie had left for me in a battered envelope tucked inside a safe deposit box, into Daniel's consulting business. A business that, it turned out, was as real as his promises. I think a part of me broke then. Something quiet. Something final. The front door creaked open an hour later, and Daniel's voice echoed through the entryway. Hey, Belle, you won't believe the traffic. I stood there, laptop still open, the evidence spread out like open wounds across the marble island. He saw my face and froze. There was a beat of silence so heavy it felt like the walls themselves leaned in, waiting. Where did you find that? He said finally. a note of irritation under the false concern. Not what, not why, where. The wrongness of it hit me like a slap. Why? I asked, my voice thin, almost unrecognizable. He shrugged, casual, moving toward the liquor cabinet. Come on, Belle. You know you're not exactly stimulating. He poured himself a drink, the ice clinking cheerfully against the glass. You wanted the picture-perfect life. I gave it to you. You wanted to play house. I let you. He turned, swirling the amber liquid, smirking like he was explaining a particularly dense math problem. Don't act surprised. You were always just... He waved the glass vaguely. Grateful to be chosen. The words didn't hurt the way I thought they would. Maybe because somewhere deep down, I had already suspected. Maybe because betrayal feels less like a knife to the heart, and more like a slow, strangling you eventually stop struggling against. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I just folded. Right there, in the middle of our cavernous, echoing kitchen. I slid down the side of the island until I was sitting on the cold tile floor, knees drawn to my chest, my mother's old silver locket pressing into my collarbone. Daniel sighed, exasperated, stepping over me like I was an inconvenient piece of furniture. Grow up, Belle. The door slammed behind him. I sat there for hours, maybe days. Time became something slippery, meaningless. I watched the light fade from the tall, narrow windows, watched the chandelier flicker once, twice, then go dark entirely as the storm rolled in and the power finally failed. The house, once so meticulously curated, became a hollow shell. Without the lights, it showed its bones. Cracked molding, water stains hidden behind expensive curtains, peeling paint underneath the designer wallpaper. I crawled to the closet eventually, the one room he never bothered to organize, and found the box I hadn't opened since Marie's funeral. Inside, her favorite sweater, still smelling faintly of lavender soap, a packet of letters I had never mailed, a photo of us on the front porch. My face lit up with a joy I hadn't realized I was capable of losing. I pressed the photo against my chest and let the tears come. Not polite, not pretty, but raw and ugly. Grief, guilt, rage, self-hatred. They tore through me. A storm stronger than anything outside those broken windows. And somewhere in the darkness, between the cracks of who I used to be, something else stirred. Something small. Something stubborn. I wasn't dead. Not yet. Marie hadn't raised a woman who quit because someone told her she was lucky to be chosen. She had raised a woman who fought, even if she had forgotten how. Wiped my face on the sleeve of my sweater and sat there, breathing in the smell of lavender and rain, clutching that photo like it was a lifeline. Somewhere out there, in the wreckage of my life, was a thread. And if I could find it, pull it, maybe, just maybe, I could unravel the lies and find my way back to myself. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I would, and this time, I wouldn't ask permission. The night I left, the house didn't even try to stop me. I packed one suitcase, not the polished leather kind Daniel insisted I carry to look the part, but an old battered canvas, one Marie had given me after college. It still smelled faintly of cedar and dust. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to say. The drive out of the city blurred into a smear of headlights and billboards and exit signs I barely registered. I just drove, hands clenched tight, around the wheel, my mother's silver locket warm against my chest. Somewhere past midnight, when exhaustion blurred into something raw and holy, I saw the sign, Ashwood Lake, 7 miles. A name from some half-remembered story, a place Marie once spoke about in hushed, fond tones. as if it were a secret she was saving for a rainy day. It felt like a thread, the kind I had promised myself I would follow. So I did. Ashwood wasn't a town so much as a scattering of aging cabins, a faded diner, and a weather-beaten general store where the clerk barely looked up from her crossword puzzle. It was the kind of place you could disappear in without needing to explain yourself. Perfect. The cabin I rented sat at the edge of the lake, its paint peeling and shutters hanging crooked like tired eyelids. Inside, it smelled of old wood, damp stone, and something else. Something like waiting. I dropped my suitcase by the door and sat on the splintered front steps, watching the mist roll across the black water. Breathing hurt less here. Maybe because there was finally room for the hurt to stretch out, to uncoil from the tight, silent knot it had become inside me. The first morning I cleaned, not the way I used to, scrubbing, to erase, to impress, to prove worth. No. This was different. I wiped years of grime from the windows until light poured in, revealing dust motes spinning lazily in the beams. I ripped down the heavy, mildew-soaked curtains and let the cool autumn air sweep through the house like a blessing. Every brush of the cloth, every creak of the floorboards under my feet, felt like reclaiming something I hadn't even realized was mine to reclaim. While unpacking, I found the stack of letters Daniel had never read, the ones I wrote during the lonely years when I still thought love was something you earned by trying harder. I burned them in the stone fireplace, feeding each brittle envelope to the hungry flames. The smoke curled up the chimney and out into the sky, carrying with it all the things I would no longer carry. On the third day, I found the journal. It was tucked behind a loose floorboard in the tiny bedroom, wrapped in faded oilcloth. Marie's handwriting, spiky and determined, filled the pages. Stories of her nursing shifts, of quietly paying a neighbor's heating bill, of driving hours to deliver supplies after a hurricane ravaged a town 2 states over. She had never told anyone, never asked for thanks, never explained. Reading those pages was like meeting her all over again, not the tired, worn-down woman I had selfishly resented, but the fierce, compassionate soul who had quietly moved mountains while the world sneered. Tears blurred the words more than once. But for the first time in a long time, the tears didn't hollow me out. They filled me. But it was late afternoon when I met June. I was struggling to fix the broken hinge on the front screen door, swearing softly under my breath, when I heard the shuffle of footsteps behind me. "You're gonna need a thicker screwdriver if you're planning to wrestle with that old beast," came a voice, rough but kind. I turned to find a woman in her 70s, wrapped in a heavy cardigan, a basket of apples slung over one arm. She didn't pry, didn't ask for a name or a story. She just handed me the basket and said, "For pie, or throwing at raccoons, your choice." That was how it began. June would stop by every few days, sometimes with apples, sometimes with an old wrench, sometimes with nothing but a thermos of sweet, terrible coffee. She never filled the silence with empty chatter. She let it breathe. Let me breathe, until I found myself filling it with fragments of my story without even meaning to. And she listened. Not with pity, not with judgment, just with the kind of presence that said, "You are not broken beyond mending." Ashwood Lake changed with the seasons, and so did I. The trees bled gold and crimson, and I let go of anger I didn't need. The lake froze over, and I learned how to be still without feeling useless. Spring crept in slow and stubborn, and I planted wildflowers by the porch, small defiant bursts of color in the stubborn, rocky soil. One night, sitting by the fire with June, watching, "The flames flicker and dance," she said. "You know, people spend their whole lives trying to be good enough for the wrong people. Maybe the trick is realizing you were never made for them in the first place." I nodded. the truth of it sinking deep. I had spent so long trying to shrink myself into something digestible, lovable, unthreatening. But I was not made to be small. Neither was my mother, neither am I. Healing wasn't loud. It wasn't a montage of tearful breakthroughs or dramatic epiphanies. It was slower, quieter. It was the sound of a broom dragging across a dusty floor. It was the way my hands trembled less each morning as I folded the old quilt at the foot of my bed. It was the way I started to hum under my breath again, tuneless and broken at first, but real. Ashwood Lake thawed in slow, stubborn patches. Ice cracked and gave way to dark, rippling water. Birds returned to the skeletal trees, filling the air with tentative, hopeful music. And I began to return to myself. June introduced me to Miriam, the owner of the town's tiny, stubborn bookstore. It smelled like yellowed paper and strong tea, a place where time creaked along at its own pace, untouched by the frantic world outside. Miriam didn't ask for a resume. She just said, "We could use someone who knows how to stack books without breaking their back." And just like that, I had a job. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what Daniel would have called strategic networking. It was real. I loved the weight of the books in my hands, the creak of the floorboards under my boots, the quiet moments when a child's face lit up at the sight of a new story. In the evenings, I fixed the cabin, not professionally, not perfectly, but with my own hands. June's husband taught me how to replace a broken window pane without losing a finger. Miriam's nephew showed me how to sand and seal the porch wood. Every scraped knuckle, every splinter, felt like a stitch in something larger. I was slowly mending inside myself. There was a women's center, 2 towns over, a battered, bright place full of women who smelled like laundry detergent and carried invisible scars. Sat in the back during the first few sessions, my voice trapped behind my ribs. But eventually, I spoke. And when I did, I realized I wasn't speaking to strangers. I was speaking to myself, the version of me that still lived in that silent kitchen, that still thought shrinking small enough might save her. Slowly, the shame loosened its grip. One rainy afternoon, sorting through a stack of unopened mail I had forwarded from the city, I found the bank documents. Thick, clinical, stamped with words like irregularities and unauthorized. Curiosity bloomed into suspicion, and suspicion into quiet rage. I spent hours, days, poring over them at the kitchen table, piecing together the trail Daniel had left behind like breadcrumbs he never thought I would follow. Loans taken out. In my name. Signatures forged with sickening familiarity. Properties transferred. Accounts drained. The betrayal was vast, cold, meticulous. But it didn't hollow me out the way it once might have. It crystallized something inside me. Not revenge, not exactly. Justice. Respect. For myself. For the woman Marie had raised me to be. I hired a lawyer, a small, wiry woman named Tamara, who had the calm, coiled energy of a hunting hawk. "You're not the first," she said, tapping her pen against the damning documents. "But you'll be one of the ones who walks away standing tall, if you want it bad enough." I did. God, I did. In the middle of preparing my case, I received a letter. No, return address. Inside, a military commendation, aged but pristine. A simple note, for Marie Davenport. With eternal gratitude, Captain Eli Moran. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands. The soldier from the funeral, the one who had spoken 7 words into the rain. I clutched the commendation to my chest and closed my eyes. Marie had saved lives. Quietly, without fanfare. She had been a lighthouse, not a martyr. And here I was, finally stepping out of the wreckage of everything that had tried to dim me. One evening, after the paperwork was filed, after the subpoenas were issued, after the foundations of Daniel's carefully curated world began to shake, I walked barefoot down to the lake. The ground was cold but soft beneath my feet, the last stubborn patches of snow melting into the mud. The sky was bruised pink and purple, the water rippling with the first sighs of spring. In my hand, I held my wedding ring, small, heavy, meaningless now. I turned it over between my fingers, studying it the way an archaeologist might study a relic from a civilization long dead. Once, it had been a symbol of hope, of belonging, of a future built hand in hand. Now, it was just a ring, a band forged not in love, but in control, silence, and fear. I kissed the cool metal once, not out of nostalgia, but as a farewell. Then I waded knee-deep into the lake and let it slip from my fingers. The ring caught the last light of day and sank quickly, disappearing into the dark water with barely a ripple. I stood there, the cold biting at my skin, breathing in the clean, sharp air. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I wasn't my husband's shame. I wasn't my family's whispered disappointment. I wasn't the girl who mistook crumbs for feasts. I was Marie Davenport's daughter. Was my own, and I was just getting started. The invitation arrived on heavy cardstock, the edges gilded like something out of a forgotten fairy tale. Midwinter Charity Gala, an evening of mystery and generosity. Masked auction to benefit children's arts programs. Daniel's name gleamed beneath the title, alongside his company's. It was the perfect stage, public, glittering, and hollow at its core. I stood in front of the cracked mirror in my cabin, holding the invitation between my fingers, feeling the weight of what I was about to do settle in my bones. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was ready. The night of the gala, I wore a simple black dress, one Marie had bought me years ago at a secondhand boutique, insisting every woman needs one dress she feels like herself in. I pinned my hair back loosely, slid on a thin silver bracelet, and slipped a mask over my face. Delicate black lace, framing my eyes but leaving the rest of me clear and visible. I wasn't there to hide. The venue was a glass-walled art museum downtown, the kind of place Daniel loved to be seen in. All open spaces and polished marble, chandeliers dripping crystals like frozen rain. Inside, guests floated through the halls in silk and velvet, their laughter brittle and too bright under the clink of champagne glasses. Paintings lined the walls, abstract bursts of color and violence, while tables held objects to be auctioned, rare books, vintage jewelry, luxury vacations. Masks everywhere, literal and otherwise. I moved through the crowd unnoticed, just another shadow among a sea of smiling strangers, until the moment arrived. Daniel stood at the front of the room, basking under the soft, flattering spotlight, his mask gold and elaborate, feathers fanning out like a crown. He looked the same, polished, charming, untouchable. But I had learned the truth. His kingdom was built on sand, and the tide was coming in. I stepped forward. Every eye turned toward me as the crowd parted instinctively, as if they could feel the current shifting. Daniel's smile faltered when he saw me. Just a flicker, but I caught it. I walked calmly to the front, heels clicking softly against the marble, and handed a sealed folder to the event's attorney. A man whose face went from amusement to confusion to grim understanding in seconds, as he flipped through the documents. Inside, full bank records, meticulously traced. Forged contracts, testimonies from private investigators, proof of marital misconduct and financial fraud. Enough to end his career. Enough to end the charade. A gasp rippled through the room. spreading like fire across dry brush. Masks slipped, some literally, as stunned hands reached up to yank them away, as if clearing their vision could change the unfolding reality. Daniel tried to speak, to laugh it off, to spin it. But legal officers in dark suits moved swiftly through the crowd, surrounding him. "Belle," he choked out, mask slipping from his face, eyes wide with fury and disbelief. "Belle, we can fix this." I took one step back, heels silent on the marble now, the world slowing until I could feel the pulse in my fingertips. I looked him in the eye, really looked, and felt nothing but a cool, clean kind of clarity. I found my mother's voice inside me. I said softly. He froze, confusion flickering across his features. But it didn't matter. The spell was broken. I turned away before they led him out, before the whispers grew into a cacophony of outrage and betrayal. I didn't need to watch him fall. I had already risen. Ashwood Lake greeted me with open arms the next morning. The sky was pale and new, the water glittering under the first shy rays of spring sun. I knelt by the garden plot I had carved out by the porch. Just a small patch of stubborn soil and wild intention. The wildflower seeds I had scattered weeks ago had begun to sprout. Tiny green threads pushing through the dark earth, life insisting on itself. I dug my fingers into the dirt, feeling the coolness seep into my skin, grounding me. Around me, the cabin creaked and sighed in the warming air. The porch swing rattled lazily in the breeze. Somewhere down the shore, a loon called, its voice low and ancient. I pressed the seeds into the soil gently, whispering small blessings over each one, not prayers for forgiveness or fortune, but simple promises. I will not shrink again. I will not trade my voice for peace. I will not apologize for taking up space. When I finished, I sat back on my heels, dirt under my nails, the sun warming my face. I wore no mask now, no armor, just myself, whole, imperfect, stubbornly alive. I pulled Marie's locket from beneath my sweater and held it in my palm, feeling its familiar weight. "We're okay, Mama," I whispered to the wind. "We made it." The lake answered with a ripple, a hush, a promise carried on the morning air. I smiled, slow and true, as the first wildflower, a tiny violet, unfurled its fragile petals to the sun.